Former federal investigator Angela Brooks walked into the Riverside Police Department on an ordinary morning wearing a worn coat and no badge. To everyone inside, she was just another black woman with paperwork in her hands. No one knew she had already been appointed the next chief of police, or that this visit was part of a quiet investigation into discrimination and abuse of power. When mockery turned into intimidation and authority crossed the line, the room revealed its true nature. Their greatest mistake was believing silence meant weakness. This story explores dignity, restraint, and how power should never define human worth. Before we begin, tell us in the comments, where are you watching from today? And if you believe some heroes are willing to look guilty to save the innocent, this story is for you. Riverside woke slowly under a thin veil of rain. The city, tucked along a winding river in southern Ohio, looked quieter than usual that morning. The streets were damp, reflecting pale gray skies and the muted glow of traffic lights. The rain was not heavy, just enough to soften sound, to blur edges, to make people pull their coats tighter and keep their heads down. It was the kind of morning where nothing dramatic seemed likely to happen. At exactly 8:17 a.m., Angela Brooks stepped through the glass doors of the Riverside Police Department. She paused for half a second as the doors slid shut behind her, letting the smell of wet pavement fade into the sterile air of the building. The lobby was wide and bright, lit by fluorescent lights that hummed faintly overhead. Flags stood stiffly in their holders. A framed mission statement hung on the wall, its words about service and integrity polished to perfection. Angela did not look like someone who belonged to that mission statement. She was 46 years old, tall but not imposing, with a solid, grounded posture that came from years of standing her ground in rooms far more hostile than this one. Her coat was old, a dark wool piece with frayed cuffs and a missing button near the collar. Beneath it, she wore plain slacks and flat shoes that had clearly seen long days. Her hair was pulled into a quick bun, tight at the base of her neck, practical and unstyled. No makeup, no jewelry beyond a simple watch on her left wrist, and no badge. To anyone watching, Angela Brooks was just another black woman walking into a police station with paperwork in her hands. She felt the shift immediately. The conversations near the front desk dipped, not into silence, but into something quieter and sharper. Eyes moved toward her and lingered a moment too long. One officer leaned back in his chair, arms crossed, his mouth curling into something that wasn't quite a smile. Another nudged his colleague and whispered something that made both of them exhale through their noses in amusement. No one greeted her. No one asked if she needed help. Angela stood still, letting the moment stretch. She had learned long ago that people revealed more about themselves when they thought no one important was watching. Her face remained neutral, calm, almost unreadable, though inside she was cataloging everything, the tone of the room, the body language, the hierarchy that existed without being spoken aloud. She adjusted the strap of her worn shoulder bag and, with a subtle movement of her fingers, activated the small camera hidden inside the lining. A soft vibration confirmed it was recording. The first piece of truth was secured. At the far side of the lobby, an elderly black man sat alone on a plastic chair beneath a flickering light. His name was Harold Jenkins, though no one had asked for it yet. He was in his early 70s, tall once, now slightly stooped, wearing a pressed brown jacket and a cap he held politely in his hands. His shoes were shined, his posture careful. The kind of man who believed in showing respect even when it wasn't returned. He had been there since before 8. Angela noticed the way his knee bounced, the way his eyes kept drifting toward the desk and then back to the floor. Every few minutes he cleared his throat softly as if reminding himself not to become a problem. No one acknowledged him. Behind the front desk sat 2 officers. One typed lazily at a computer, scrolling with his mouse more than he typed. The other leaned back, sipping coffee, his gaze drifting between his phone and the room. When Angela took a step forward, neither looked up. She waited. 10 seconds. 20. Finally, she cleared her throat. The younger officer glanced up, his eyes sweeping over her from head to toe in a way that felt more evaluative than professional. He didn't smile. "What do you need?" he asked. His name was Ethan Miller. Ethan was 24, fresh out of the academy less than a year ago. Tall, lean, with sandy hair that never quite stayed in regulation, he still carried the stiffness of someone trying very hard to belong. His uniform fit well, too well, pressed sharply as if to compensate for his uncertainty. His eyes, a light gray, flickered with something close to hesitation. Curiosity tangled with caution. Angela met his gaze calmly. "I'm here to see human resources," she said. Her voice was even, unhurried. Ethan hesitated, fingers hovering over the keyboard. "You have an appointment?" "No," Angela replied. "I was told to come in this morning." He looked at her again, this time more closely, as if searching for clues he couldn't quite place. Then his eyes slid past her, toward the other officer, who shrugged without looking up. "We're busy," the older officer muttered. "HR opens later." Angela glanced at the wall clock. It read 8:19. "According to the posted hours," she said gently. "HR opens at 8. The older officer smirked. "You can wait." Angela nodded once and stepped aside. She did not sit. She positioned herself near the wall, where she could see the entire lobby. From there, she watched as other visitors came and went. A white man in a business jacket walked in and was greeted immediately, waved toward an office without being asked to wait. A woman with a stroller was offered a chair and a cup of water. Harold Jenkins remained seated, invisible. Ethan noticed. He shifted in his chair, glancing at the older man, then at Angela. His jaw tightened slightly. He opened his mouth once, then closed it again. He told himself it wasn't his place, that he was new, that he needed to keep his head down. That was the first lie he told himself that morning. Angela caught the movement, the conflict flickering across his face. She did not intervene. Not yet. Minutes passed. The rain outside intensified, tapping against the windows with more insistence now. Angela felt the familiar weight settle in her chest, not anger, not sadness, but resolve. She had walked into rooms like this before, decades ago, when she had been younger and angrier, when every slight had burned like a match struck too close to her skin. Time had changed her. Experience had hardened her in different ways. She thought briefly of her past, of the years she had spent climbing through departments that praised her discipline but questioned her authority, of the case long ago that had altered her trajectory entirely, a whistleblower investigation where she had watched a colleague lose everything for telling the truth, while those in power walked away untouched. That was the moment Angela learned that justice did not move on emotion. It moved on evidence. She glanced down at her bag, feeling the steady reassurance of the camera still recording. From a hallway to the right, footsteps approached, measured, confident, unmistakably authoritative. Conversations hushed. Chairs straightened. The atmosphere shifted again, this time not away from Angela, but around her. Captain Daniel Wright entered the lobby. He was in his early 50s, broad-shouldered, with a commanding presence that came less from physical size and more from certainty. His uniform was immaculate, his badge polished to a mirror shine. His hair was neatly combed back, graying at the temples, and his face carried the practiced confidence of a man who had not been meaningfully challenged in years. Daniel Wright had built his reputation on order, on tradition, on the belief that respect flowed in one direction. He scanned the room quickly, eyes moving from officer to officer, then stopping on Angela. His gaze lingered, narrowed, assessing. "What's going on here?" he asked. The older officer at the desk straightened immediately. "This woman's waiting for HR." Wright raised an eyebrow. "HR?" Angela stepped forward calmly. "Yes, sir." Wright looked her up and down. his expression unreadable for a moment before something faintly dismissive settled in. HR doesn't take walk-ins. I was instructed to come today, Angela replied. By whom? Hung unspoken in the air. Wright crossed his arms. You'll need to wait? I've been waiting, Angela said evenly. A few officers nearby exchanged glances. One of them snorted quietly. Wright didn't notice or didn't care. We'll get to you when we can. Angela nodded once, stepping back to her place by the wall. As Wright turned away, his eyes flicked briefly toward Harold Jenkins, then slid past him without acknowledgement. Ethan saw it all. The room settled back into its uneasy rhythm, but something had shifted. The air felt tighter, charged with a tension that had not been there before. Angela remained standing, composed, silent. The camera continued to record. Outside, the rain kept falling, and inside the Riverside Police Department, the first line had been drawn. Quietly, deliberately, and without anyone realizing just how much was already at stake. The lobby did not change after Captain Wright disappeared down the hallway. If anything, it relaxed, like a room that believed the moment of scrutiny had passed. Conversations resumed at a low volume. Chairs creaked. A printer whirred somewhere behind the wall. The fluorescent lights hummed on, steady and indifferent. Angela Brooks remained where she was, standing near the wall, posture calm, eyes observant. She did not pretend to scroll on her phone or fidget to pass time. She let the waiting exist as it was meant to. Exposed. At the front desk, a new visitor arrived. A white man in his early 30s wearing a clean jacket and carrying a folder with a real estate logo on the front. He stepped up, cleared his throat once, and was greeted immediately. Morning, the older desk officer said, voice warm now. How can we help you? Angela watched the exchange carefully. The man explained he needed a signature on a report. Within seconds, he was waved through the side door and offered directions. The interaction was efficient, friendly, almost rehearsed. Behind him, Harold Jenkins shifted in his seat. He had not moved in nearly 20 minutes. Angela noticed the way Harold straightened his jacket again, smoothing imaginary wrinkles as if preparing himself for rejection. He lifted his chin slightly, eyes flicking toward the desk, then away. The camera in Angela's bag captured it all. The difference in tone, in timing, in attention. A woman stepped out from behind a half-glass partition to the left. Her name was Linda Parker. Linda was in her late 30s, average height with light brown hair pulled into a tight ponytail that had begun to loosen at the edges. She wore a navy cardigan over a beige blouse and sensible shoes that suggested she spent most of her day on her feet. Her face carried a softness that did not belong in a place like this, kind eyes, a mouth that curved downward more often than not. Linda was a clerical assistant in the administrative wing, not a sworn officer. She handled intake forms, routed requests, and answered phones. She was good at her job. Too good, perhaps. Good enough to notice patterns she pretended not to see. She glanced at Harold Jenkins, then at Angela. Their eyes met briefly. Linda looked away first. She stepped closer to the desk, lowering her voice. "He's been waiting a while," she murmured to the older officer, nodding toward Harold. The officer didn't look up. "He can wait?" Linda hesitated. Her fingers tightened around the clipboard she held. "It won't take long," she said quietly. The officer finally glanced at her, annoyance flickering across his face. "I said he can wait." Linda nodded, the motion small, practiced. She retreated without another word. Angela noted the exchange with interest. Linda Parker was not cruel. She was careful, and care, in this building, had been taught as survival. From behind the desk, Ethan Miller watched it all unfold. His foot tapped lightly against the base of his chair, a nervous habit he hadn't managed to shake since the academy. He leaned toward the older officer beside him. "Maybe we should," Ethan began. The older officer cut him off without looking at him. Don't. Ethan swallowed. He stared at the monitor in front of him, the cursor blinking impatiently. He felt the familiar pressure building in his chest, the sense that he was standing at the edge of something important and being told, once again, to step back. As if summoned by the tension, two uniformed officers passed through the lobby from the rear corridor. One of them, Officer Mark Collins, was a stocky man in his 40s with a shaved head and a loud laugh that filled space easily. The other, Officer Jason Reed, younger and thinner, followed half a step behind, his expression perpetually amused, as if the world were an inside joke he had already understood. Collins glanced at Angela and smirked. "HR letting walk-ins again?" he said, not bothering to lower his voice. Reed chuckled. "Must be a slow day." They kept walking. Angela did not react. She did not need to. The camera had caught the moment perfectly. At the desk, Ethan shifted again. He glanced toward Angela, then toward Harold, then leaned slightly toward the older officer. "Sir," he said under his breath, "maybe I can help him real quick." The older officer finally turned, his eyes sharp. "Listen, kid," he said quietly but firmly. "Around here, it's best not to play hero." The words landed heavily. Ethan nodded, though his jaw tightened. He had heard variations of that sentence before. During field training in locker rooms, whispered after briefings. It was always framed as advice, as protection. Angela heard it too. She did not turn her head. She simply committed it to memory. The minutes dragged on. Rain streaked down the windows now in thin lines, blurring the outside world. Angela felt the faint warmth of the building settle into her coat. She shifted her weight once, careful to keep her movements minimal. She wanted nothing that could be interpreted as impatience. Inside her bag, the camera recorded steadily. She thought of the files she had reviewed the night before. Complaints submitted years apart by different people, describing the same patterns. Requests ignored. Reports misplaced. Follow-ups that led nowhere. One file, in particular, lingered in her mind. A woman who had filed 3 separate complaints, each time receiving confirmation that her paperwork had been received, only to be told later that there was no record of it. Lost. Misfiled. Gone. Angela knew better. She glanced toward the administrative corridor again, remembering how many times she had watched evidence disappear not through destruction, but neglect. At last, Linda Parker reappeared, this time carrying a small stack of folders. She stopped near Harold, lowering her voice. "Sir," she said gently, "can I help you fill out your form while you wait?" Harold looked up, surprised. "Oh, thank you, ma'am," he said, relief flickering across his face. They moved to a side table. Linda handed him a pen. Her hands shook slightly. Angela watched the interaction closely. Linda was careful to keep her voice low, her body angled away from the desk. It was an act of kindness performed quietly, almost apologetically. Ethan noticed too. He leaned back in his chair, eyes following them, then glanced at Angela again. Something in her stillness unsettled him. Not in a threatening way, but in a way that made him aware of himself. Angela met his gaze briefly this time. She offered him nothing. No smile, no reassurance, just acknowledgement. Ethan looked away first. A call came in on the desk phone. The older officer answered, his tone polite again. Professional. Angela noted how easily the switch flipped, how courtesy was not absent, merely selective. When the call ended, the officer stood and walked toward the back offices without a word. Ethan was left alone at the desk. For a moment, the room felt different. Ethan cleared his throat. He glanced at Angela, then toward Harold and Linda. He hesitated, fingers gripping the edge of the desk. "Ma'am," he said quietly to Angela, "HR's usually less busy after 9. Angela inclined her head slightly. "Thank you," she replied. It was the first helpful thing anyone had said to her all morning. Ethan nodded, relief and anxiety mixing on his face. From the hallway, laughter erupted briefly. Collins and Reed again, voices loud, careless. Angela did not need to see them to know what kind of men they were. She had known them in different uniforms in different cities across a long career. The system did not create them. It kept them. Linda finished helping Harold with his paperwork. She took the form and promised she would personally make sure it was delivered. Harold thanked her twice, his voice earnest. As he returned to his seat, he caught Angela's eye and gave her a small, respectful nod. Angela returned it. The clock on the wall clicked forward. 8:43 a.m. The rain outside began to ease, but inside the Riverside Police Department, nothing had shifted yet. Not officially, not visibly, but Angela knew better. The camera continued to record, and the old system, unaware it was being measured, kept revealing itself, one small indifference at a time. The moment Captain Daniel Wright stepped fully into the lobby, the room rearranged itself around him without a single order being spoken. Chairs straightened, voices dropped. Even the fluorescent lights seemed harsher, as if attention itself had weight. Angela Brooks felt the shift and recognized it for what it was. Power practiced so long it no longer needed to announce itself. Wright stopped a few feet from her. Up close, he looked older than he appeared from a distance. The lines around his mouth were deep, carved by years of command and the certainty that came with it. His eyes were sharp, assessing, used to finding weaknesses quickly. He carried himself like a man who believed the building belonged to him, not legally, but morally. "You said you wanted human resources," he said, not as a question. "Yes," Angela replied. Her tone was level, respectful, and precise. "I'm here to complete administrative paperwork." Wright's mouth twitched, the faintest sign of amusement. "Administrative paperwork," he repeated, glancing briefly at the desk officers as if inviting them into the joke. A couple of smiles appeared. Someone exhaled a quiet laugh. "We don't usually handle that without proper identification," Wright continued. "Badge, appointment, referral." Angela met his eyes. "I was instructed to come this morning. HR opens at 8. Wright tilted his head slightly, studying her. "Instructed by whom?" "By the department," Angela said. That answer irritated him. It lacked the clarity he wanted, the hierarchy he expected. Wright crossed his arms. "That's not how it works," he said. "People don't just walk in and demand access." "I'm not demanding," Angela replied. "I'm requesting." Behind her, Ethan Miller shifted in his chair. He felt his pulse pick up. This was the tone Wright used before things turned sharp. Ethan had seen it before, during roll calls, during closed-door meetings when complaints came up that Wright didn't like. Wright stepped half a pace closer. "Request denied," he said lightly. "You can wait or you can leave." Angela did neither. She simply nodded once, acknowledging the statement, then said, "For clarity, Captain, I'd like that refusal noted." Wright blinked. "Noted?" "Yes," Angela said. "That I requested HR access during posted hours and was refused." A murmur rippled through the nearby officers. It wasn't loud, but it was there, a flicker of uncertainty. Procedures mattered here, at least on paper. Wright's jaw tightened. "There's no need for that." "Procedure exists for a reason," Angela said calmly. "Transparency." The word transparency landed badly. Wright laughed, short and humorless. "You're talking about procedures like you work here." "I'm talking about procedures like they matter," Angela replied. At the edge of the lobby, Officer Mark Collins snorted. "Someone's been reading the handbook," he muttered. Wright didn't turn to him. His attention stayed locked on Angela. "Look," he said, lowering his voice in a way meant to sound reasonable. "We deal with serious matters here, complaints, incidents, not whatever this is." Angela felt the insult clearly, cleanly. She did not flinch. "Paperwork is how systems stay accountable," she said. "Without it, things go missing." Wright's eyes flickered for a fraction of a second. The camera in Angela's bag caught it. "You implying something?" he asked. "I'm stating a fact," Angela replied. "Records matter." Linda Parker, standing near the administrative corridor, froze. Her fingers tightened around the folders she carried. She remembered the time she had been told to refile documents. The times complaints had been returned to her desk with vague instructions to double-check, and then quietly disappeared. Wright glanced toward Linda. "We run a tight ship," he said loudly enough for the room to hear. "Anyone suggesting otherwise is mistaken." Angela nodded. "Then my request shouldn't be a problem." Silence followed. It stretched long enough to be uncomfortable. Wright exhaled slowly through his nose. "You're disrupting operations," he said. "I'm asking you to step aside." "I am standing aside," Angela replied, gesturing subtly to the wall behind her. "I'm not obstructing anything." Ethan swallowed. He had never heard anyone speak to Wright like this without consequence. He glanced toward the older officer beside him, but the man stared straight ahead, suddenly fascinated by the computer screen. From the hallway, another figure emerged. A woman in a tailored gray suit, mid-40s, sharp haircut, glasses perched low on her nose. Her name was Sarah Collins, no relation to Mark, an internal compliance officer assigned to review departmental metrics. She was tall and slender, posture rigid, with a reputation for being meticulous and emotionally distant. Years earlier, a mishandled audit had nearly ended her career, and since then she trusted numbers more than people. Sarah paused when she sensed the tension. Her eyes moved from Wright to Angela, then to the desk, noting the body language, the room's posture. "Captain," she said, measured. "Everything all right?" Wright didn't like Sarah. He respected her position, but she represented oversight, an inconvenience at best. "Fine," he said curtly. "Just handling a misunderstanding." Angela looked at Sarah. "I'm requesting HR access," she said plainly. Sarah adjusted her glasses. "Do you have an appointment?" "I was instructed to come this morning." Sarah considered that. "By whom?" "The department," Angela repeated. Sarah hesitated. She knew that answer too well. It was the kind that appeared in memos and disappeared in practice. Wright stepped in. "We've already addressed this," he said. "She can wait." Sarah looked at Angela again, curiosity flickering behind professional restraint. "HR is short-staffed," she said carefully. "There may be a delay." "I understand delays," Angela replied. "I don't understand refusals." Wright's patience thinned visibly. "You're pushing boundaries," he said. "This isn't the place for—" "For what?" Angela asked quietly. He stopped himself. The sentence remained unfinished, hanging in the air like an accusation he couldn't safely name. A few officers shifted uncomfortably. Someone coughed. Wright straightened, reclaiming his authority. "You'll wait," he said firmly. "That's my final word." Angela inclined her head slightly. "Then please note that as well." Wright stared at her, incredulous. "You really think you can walk in here and lecture us about our own procedures?" "I think procedures apply to everyone," Angela said, "or they don't mean anything." That did it. Wright turned sharply toward the desk. "Is anyone writing this down?" he snapped. Ethan flinched. I can make a note," he said, surprising himself. Wright glared at him. "Did I ask you?" Ethan's face flushed. "No, sir." Angela watched the exchange closely. The camera captured Wright's reaction, the way his authority moved to suppress even the smallest deviation. Wright turned back to Angela. "You've made your point," he said coldly. "Now you'll wait quietly or you'll leave." Angela held his gaze. "I'm already quiet." The room fell into a tense stillness. Wright's control was slipping, not dramatically, not yet, but in small, visible ways. His words were no longer landing the way he expected. He stepped back. "I have work to do," he said. "We'll deal with this later." As he turned away, his voice carried one last remark over his shoulder. "Some people don't know their place." The sentence landed like a slap. A couple of officers laughed, reflexive and uneasy. Others looked away. Angela remained still. The camera recorded everything. Wright disappeared down the hallway, the door swinging shut behind him with a dull click. The lobby slowly resumed its low murmur, but something had changed. The laughter sounded forced now, the smiles brittle. Sarah Collins lingered a moment longer, studying Angela with open curiosity this time. She said nothing, then turned and followed Wright. Ethan exhaled, realizing he had been holding his breath. Angela shifted her weight slightly, the first visible movement she had made in minutes. She glanced at the clock. 8:57 a.m. She adjusted the strap of her bag. The camera was still running. The system had spoken. And it had revealed more than it intended. The lobby did not erupt when Captain Wright returned. It tightened. He came back through the hallway door with the same measured stride, but the patience he had worn earlier was gone. His shoulders were squared too rigidly, his jaw set in a way that suggested a decision had already been made. The low murmur in the room faded as officers sensed the shift. This was the posture Wright used when he intended to reassert control. Not with policy, but with presence. Angela Brooks remained by the wall where she had stood for nearly an hour. Her expression had not changed. She neither looked away nor challenged him with a stare. She simply existed in the space, composed, immovable. Wright stopped an arm's length from her. "I told you to wait quietly," he said. "I am waiting," Angela replied. Her voice was steady, unraised. "And I'm quiet." A few officers exchanged looks. The statement was impossible to refute. Wright exhaled sharply. "You keep repeating yourself," he said. "That tells me you're not listening." "I'm listening," Angela answered. "I'm also asking that my request be processed according to procedure." The word procedure again. It hit Wright like grit in his teeth. "You don't get to dictate how things work here," he said. "Not to me, not to anyone." Angela inclined her head slightly, a gesture that acknowledged his authority without yielding to it. "I'm not dictating," she said. "I'm documenting." That was when his composure cracked. Wright took a step closer, invading the space he had deliberately kept before. His voice dropped, rougher now. "You think standing there calmly makes you untouchable?" Angela did not move. "I think calm keeps situations from escalating." A few officers laughed, short, uneasy bursts meant to align themselves with power. Others shifted their weight, suddenly fascinated by the floor. Behind the desk, Ethan Miller felt his stomach knot. He watched the distance close, the line disappear. He stood up slightly without realizing it, his chair scraping the tile. The sound was small, but it cut through the tension. Wright glanced at him. "Sit down," he snapped. Ethan froze. His knees locked. For a moment he considered speaking, considered saying something, anything. But the room pressed in on him, heavy with expectation. He lowered himself back into the chair, his face burning. Angela noticed. She filed the moment away. Linda Parker stood near the administrative corridor, her back half turned to the lobby. She clutched the folders to her chest like a shield. Her fingers trembled visibly now. She had seen confrontations before, raised voices, slammed doors. But this was different. This was public. This was ugly. Wright turned his attention fully back to Angela. "I'm done entertaining this," he said. "You're leaving." "I'm not obstructing anyone," Angela replied. "I'm exercising my right to—" Wright's hand shot out. He grabbed the front of her coat. fingers digging into the worn fabric just below her collarbone. The motion was fast, practiced, as if his body had learned it long before his mind had to agree. The room went still. Angela felt the sudden pull, the coarse scrape of fabric against her skin. Her breath hitched for a fraction of a second, not from fear, but from the unexpectedness of the contact. She did not cry out, she did not struggle. She placed her feet firmly on the floor and met Wright's eyes. "Do not touch me," she said quietly. The words were not shouted. They were not pleading. They were firm, unmistakable. Wright's grip tightened. "I'm removing you," he said, "now." He shoved her toward the exit. Angela stumbled back a step as the force caught her off guard, but she regained her balance quickly. Her shoulders struck the wall lightly. She felt the eyes of the room on her, the weight of witnessing without intervention. Several officers near the back lifted their phones, movements subtle but deliberate. Screens glowed faintly as recording began. Not out of concern, out of instinct. Out of the same reflex that filmed accidents instead of stopping them. Linda Parker turned her face away, eyes squeezed shut, her breath shallow. She could not watch this and still pretend it wasn't happening. Ethan surged forward half a step before he could stop himself. His hand lifted slightly, fingers curling as if reaching for something that wasn't there. "Captain," he began. Wright shot him a look that could cut glass. Ethan stopped. His hand fell back to his side. Shame flooded him, hot and immediate. He hated himself in that moment more than he feared Wright. Angela's heart pounded now, but her face remained composed. Years of discipline held her steady. She had anticipated resistance. She had anticipated hostility. She had not anticipated how easily power would abandon restraint when challenged quietly. "Let go," she said again. Wright leaned in close enough that she could smell the coffee on his breath. "You don't tell me what to do in my building." Angela met his gaze. "Then this will be on you." The words landed harder than shouting would have. Wright's expression twisted, anger mixed with something else, something more dangerous. His grip loosened for a split second, then shoved again, harder this time, forcing Angela toward the glass doors. Her heel caught the edge of the mat. She stumbled, hands instinctively lifting to steady herself. The camera in her bag continued to record. The lobby was silent now. No laughter, no whispers, only the sound of rain tapping faintly against glass and Angela's breath, controlled but audible. Wright released her abruptly, stepping back as if the contact itself had suddenly become unacceptable. "Get out," he said, "before I make this worse." Angela straightened slowly. She adjusted her coat where it had been pulled, smoothing the fabric with deliberate care. Her hands were steady. "I'm not leaving," she said. The room seemed to inhale collectively. Wright stared at her, disbelief flashing across his face. "You're making a mistake." Angela shook her head once. "I'm making a record." That was when he lost what little restraint he had left. His hand rose again, not to grab, but to strike. Time stretched in that instant. Ethan saw it and felt his chest seize. Linda gasped softly, a sound trapped behind her hand. Phones tilted upward, capturing the moment from different angles. Angela saw it too. She did not flinch. The blow had not yet landed. The chapter did not need it to. The damage was already done. Wright's arm hovered for a fraction of a second, suspended by rage and disbelief, by a system that had never required him to stop himself before. Angela stood firm, eyes locked on his, silent and unyielding. The camera recorded everything. The strike landed with a dull, unmistakable sound. Captain Wright's hand connected with Angela Brooks's face in the center of the lobby, the impact sharp enough to echo against the tiled floor and glass walls. For a fraction of a second, no one moved. No one breathed. The building seemed to freeze around the violence it had just allowed. Angela staggered back, her heels slipping on the edge of the mat. The world tilted briefly as the force knocked her off balance. She went down hard, one knee hitting the floor first, then her palm, steadying herself before the rest of her body followed. The pain flared hot along her cheek and jaw, radiating outward, but she did not cry out. Silence followed, then something worse. A few quiet laughs broke through the stillness, scattered and uncertain, the kind that came from habit rather than humor. It was a reflex learned over years, a line with power even when it disgusts you. One officer cleared his throat, another shifted his weight and looked away. Angela stayed down for a heartbeat longer than necessary, not out of weakness, but calculation. She felt the thrum of blood in her ears, the sting on her skin, the camera in her bag pressed firmly against her ribs. Still recording, still capturing everything. Then she pushed herself up. She rose slowly, deliberately, as if standing were a statement in itself. She brushed her palm against her slacks, ignoring the dirt, and straightened her coat with careful hands. Her face was flushed now, a faint mark already forming along her cheekbone, but her eyes were clear, calm, focused. She did not look afraid. That unsettled them. Behind the desk, Ethan Miller felt his stomach drop. The sound of the strike replayed in his mind again and again. He stared at Angela as she stood, disbelief and shame flooding through him in equal measure. He had seen excessive force in training videos, heard it discussed in abstract terms. But this was real, and it was happening because he had done nothing. His hands trembled. For the first time since he had pinned on his badge, Ethan felt the full weight of what silence cost. Near the administrative corridor, Linda Parker pressed her back against the wall, one hand covering her mouth. Tears welled in her eyes, unbidden and furious. She had spent years convincing herself that keeping her head down helped no one. But she had never seen the consequences so clearly, so brutally laid bare in front of her. Several phones were now fully raised. Officers who had not dared intervene found courage in their screens. The glow of recording lenses reflected off the glass walls, catching angles Wright would never be able to erase. Every reaction, the laughter, the shock, the indifference, was being preserved. Angela met Wright's eyes. "You've crossed the line," she said quietly. Wright stood rigid, chest heaving, his fist still clenched at his side. The adrenaline that had carried him through the moment began to ebb, replaced by something colder. Around him, the room no longer felt compliant. It felt watchful. "You fell," he said, his voice tight. Angela didn't let him finish. "You struck me," she said, "in a public building, in front of witnesses." A murmur rippled through the room. Someone whispered, barely audible, "Jesus." At the edge of the lobby, a uniformed security guard shifted forward. His name was Thomas Hale, a broad-shouldered man in his late 50s with graying hair and a lined face that suggested years spent standing watch in places like this. He had worked security most of his life, first private, then contracted, and he had learned to recognize moments when power tipped too far. Hale leaned toward another guard and murmured, "He's done." The words were not loud, but they carried. Wright heard them. He turned sharply toward Hale. "Stay out of this," he snapped. Hale didn't move. He simply folded his arms, his expression unreadable. Angela felt the shift in the room as well, the subtle but unmistakable change that came when certainty began to fracture. She had anticipated violence. She had anticipated denial. What mattered now was what came next. She took a breath, steadying herself. The pain in her face pulsed, but it was distant, secondary. "This was not an accident," she said, her voice carrying evenly across the lobby. "And it wasn't isolated." Wright scoffed, trying to reclaim ground. "You provoked me." "I stood still," Angela replied, "and you hit me." Ethan rose from his chair fully now. His legs felt weak, but he forced himself to stand. "Captain," he said, his voice cracking despite his effort to control it. "There are cameras." Wright spun on him. "Sit down." Ethan did not. For a moment the two men stared at each other, the veteran and the rookie, authority and conscience locked in a silent standoff. Wright saw something in Ethan's face then that he hadn't seen before. Not fear. Resolve. Angela watched it happen. She said nothing. She didn't need to. Linda Parker took a step forward, then another. Her hands shook, but she lowered them from her face. I saw it," she said softly. Everyone did. The room seemed to exhale. Wright looked around, finally taking in the full scope of what he had done. The phones, the witnesses, the stillness that was no longer submission, but judgment. Angela reached into her bag and removed her hand. Not the documents, not the badge, not yet, just her phone. She checked the screen briefly, confirming the recording was intact. Then she looked up. "This is why I came," she said. Wright laughed, sharp and brittle. "You think this proves something?" "I think it confirms it," Angela replied. She took one careful step forward. "There are complaints you signed off on, records that disappeared, patterns of behavior you ignored or encouraged." Wright's face drained of color. "You don't know what you're talking about," he said, but the conviction was gone. "I know exactly what I'm talking about," Angela replied, "and so does everyone in this room." The rain outside had stopped entirely now. Sunlight filtered weakly through the glass, illuminating the lobby in a way that felt almost cruel in its clarity. No one laughed anymore. Ethan felt tears sting his eyes. He blinked them back, jaw clenched. He had wanted to believe that doing nothing was neutral. Now he understood. It was a choice. Hale shifted his stance slightly, positioning himself between Wright and the exit without making it obvious. A precaution. A message. Angela remained where she was, grounded, present. She touched her cheek briefly, then let her hand fall. "This moment didn't happen in isolation," she said. "It's the result of years of silence." Wright opened his mouth to respond, but no words came. The lobby held its breath. The line had been crossed, and there was no stepping back over it. The lobby felt smaller now. Not physically, nothing about the walls or ceilings had changed, but the space itself seemed to contract under the weight of what had just happened. Captain Wright stood rigid near the center of the room, his authority bleeding away in real time, while Angela Brooks remained a few steps from him, steady, composed, unmistakably in control of herself. The glass door to the administrative wing opened quietly. A man stepped out, adjusting the knot of his tie as if he had been interrupted mid-thought. His name was Michael Grant, the Deputy Director of Human Resources. In his early 40s, Michael had a lean build and a tired face softened by intelligence rather than age. His dark hair was beginning to thin at the temples, and faint lines framed his eyes, marks left not by power but by responsibility. He was known throughout the department as meticulous and cautious, someone who believed deeply in process because he had once seen what happened when process failed. Michael stopped short when he saw Angela. For a split second, the room disappeared for him. "Angela," he said, disbelief cutting through his professional tone. Angela turned toward him. For the first time that morning, a hint of recognition crossed her face. "Michael," she replied calmly. The sound of her voice saying his name was enough. Michael's breath caught. His eyes flicked to her cheek, still flushed from the blow, then back to her face. The color drained from his own. "Oh my God," he murmured. Captain Wright frowned. "You know her?" Michael straightened slowly, every movement deliberate. "Yes," he said. "I do." The silence that followed was absolute. Michael took a step forward, his posture changing as realization settled fully into place. "Angela Brooks," he said, louder now, his voice steady despite the shock running through him. "Former Internal Oversight Director, my former commanding officer." Murmurs rippled through the room. Officers who had been standing casually now stiffened. A few took involuntary steps back. Wright stared at Michael. "What are you talking about?" Michael turned to face him. "I'm talking about the fact that you just assaulted the incoming chief of police." The words hit like a physical blow. Wright's mouth opened, closed, opened again. "That's not possible," he said quickly. "No one said. There was no announcement." "There was a decision," Michael replied. "Signed and sealed 3 days ago." Angela reached into her bag at last. She withdrew a folded document, crisp despite the wear of the morning, and held it out. "Effective immediately," she said evenly. "I've been appointed chief of police for the city of Riverside." Michael took the paper from her hands, though he already knew what it would say. He glanced at it briefly, then turned it outward so the department seal and signature were visible to everyone. A wave of shock moved through the lobby. Officers who had laughed earlier avoided each other's eyes now. Some stared at the floor. Others fixed their gaze on the walls, on their phones, on anything but the woman standing in front of them. Captain Wright's face went pale. "No," he said. This is a misunderstanding." Angela looked at him. Her expression was neither triumphant nor angry. It was resolute. "There's no misunderstanding," she said. "Only documentation." She tapped the side of her bag lightly. Every interaction this morning was recorded. Every word, every action. Wright shook his head, backing away a step. "You provoked me," he said again, desperation creeping into his voice. "You came in here looking for trouble." "I came in here looking for the truth," Angela replied. "You provided it." Michael stepped forward now, placing himself subtly between Angela and Wright, not as a shield, but as a boundary. "Captain," he said, "you need to stop talking." Wright ignored him. "This is a setup," he said, voice rising. "A political stunt?" Angela did not raise her voice. "This is an audit," she said. "One your department has been avoiding for years." Michael turned to the officers near the desk. "All recordings from internal cameras are to be preserved immediately," he said. "No deletions, no access without authorization." Several heads snapped up. Phones were lowered. A few officers exchanged panicked looks. Ethan Miller straightened fully where he stood. For the first time since Angela had entered the building, his shoulders squared instead of shrinking. His spine aligned, his chin lifted slightly. He did not speak, but his posture said enough. He was done pretending not to see. Angela noticed. She continued calmly. "There are complaints that were dismissed without review, reports that were rerouted, then lost, witness statements that were never logged." Her gaze moved slowly across the room. "That didn't happen by accident." Michael nodded. "I'll initiate a full review immediately." Wright's breathing grew shallow. "You can't do this," he said. "I've served this department for 20 years. And for 20 years, Angela replied, this department has been serving the wrong people." Linda Parker stood frozen near the wall, tears still clinging to her lashes. She felt something unfamiliar rise in her chest, not fear, but relief. Someone had finally said it out loud. A few officers who had been whispering earlier now stood apart from one another, eyes darting, calculating distances, physical and moral. Angela turned back to Michael. "I want HR files secured," she said. "Immediately." Michael nodded. "Already done." Wright laughed weakly. "You think a piece of paper makes you in charge?" Angela met his gaze. "No," she said. "Accountability does." She took a step closer, not threatening, not aggressive, simply present. "And you just made yourself accountable." Wright looked around the room, searching for support. He found none. The laughter was gone. The alignment he had relied on had dissolved into silence. Ethan felt something loosen in his chest. For the first time, the room felt different. Not safe yet, not healed, but honest. Angela addressed the room as a whole now. This morning wasn't about humiliation, she said. It was about observation. She paused. Some of you failed. Some of you stayed silent. A few of you tried to help quietly. Her eyes rested briefly on Linda, then on Ethan. All of that matters, she said, and it's all on record. Wright sagged slightly, the fight draining out of him. What happens now? He asked, barely above a whisper. Angela did not answer that question yet. She turned to Michael instead. Please inform Internal Affairs that their presence will be required. Michael nodded once. I'll make the call. The lobby remained still. No one moved. No one spoke. The truth had been revealed. Not with anger, not with spectacle, but with evidence and restraint. Angela Brooks stood at the center of it, calm amid the wreckage, exactly where she had intended to be. The decision did not arrive with a shout. Angela Brooks stood still for a long moment after Michael Grant finished his call, letting the room settle into the truth it could no longer avoid. The lobby felt exposed now, like a stage after the curtain had been pulled back too far to pretend nothing had happened. Faces that once carried confidence now held calculation. Silence, finally, belonged to accountability. Captain Daniel Wright, Angela said, her voice calm and unmistakably clear, you are under arrest. The words cut through the space with a precision that needed no emphasis. Wright's head snapped up. For a second, disbelief flashed across his face, followed quickly by fear. For assault, Angela continued, for abuse of authority, for racial discrimination, and for knowingly concealing departmental misconduct. Wright laughed weakly, a sound that collapsed halfway through. You don't have the authority. I do, Angela replied. She did not raise her voice. She did not step closer. She simply waited. Two officers moved forward hesitantly, then stopped, unsure of themselves. Angela turned slightly, meeting their eyes. Proceed, she said. They did. The click of the handcuffs echoed louder than any argument could have. Wright stiffened as the metal closed around his wrists, the reality settling fully into his posture for the first time. He did not resist. There was nothing left to resist with. A murmur swept the lobby. Not laughter this time, but a low, uncertain sound, as if the building itself were adjusting to a new order. Ethan Miller watched, his heart pounding. When one of the officers asked him to retrieve the incident log, Ethan did not hesitate. He moved quickly, efficiently, his hands steady despite the adrenaline coursing through him. This time, he did not look to see who was watching. Linda Parker stood near the administrative corridor, shoulders squared now, tears dried on her cheeks. She felt something lift inside her, a weight she hadn't realized she'd been carrying. When Michael Grant asked her to secure the intake files and remain available for questioning, she nodded without fear. Of course, she said. I'll help however I can. Across the room, Thomas Hale, the security guard, maintained his quiet watch. He gave Angela a brief nod. Not approval, not gratitude, just recognition. He had seen many men fall in buildings like this. He had rarely seen them fall for the right reasons. Wright was escorted out through the same glass doors Angela had entered that morning. The rain had long since stopped. Sunlight fell across the sidewalk, bright and unforgiving. A small group of bystanders had gathered, drawn by the sudden activity. Phones lifted. Whispers spread. Inside, Angela turned back to the room. This investigation doesn't end with one arrest, she said. It expands. Michael Grant nodded. Internal Affairs is en route. We'll secure all files, digital and physical. Angela's gaze moved slowly across the officers present. Some of you will be placed on administrative leave. Others will be called in for statements. She paused. "Your cooperation will matter." Several heads nodded quickly. Others lowered. Ethan felt his throat tighten as Angela's eyes met his. She held his gaze for a moment longer than the rest. "You'll be asked to testify," she said. "Yes, ma'am," Ethan replied. The word came naturally now. The hours that followed were controlled, procedural, thorough. Evidence was collected. Statements were recorded. Phones that had captured the incident were logged and secured. No one argued. No one joked. The old habits had lost their footing. By evening, the lobby had emptied. The building felt different. Quieter, stripped of its bravado. Angela remained until the last report was filed, her presence steady but unobtrusive. When she finally stepped outside, the city greeted her with a soft breeze and the hum of traffic resuming its normal rhythm. Months passed. The Riverside Police Department did not change overnight. Systems rarely did. But changes came, real ones. Policies were revised. Oversight committees were formed. Training programs were rewritten with input from people who had once been ignored. Officers were dismissed, suspended, reassigned. Some resigned quietly, others fought and lost. Ethan Miller testified. It was not easy. He lost friends. He gained sleepless nights. But he stood by the truth, each time with more confidence than the last. When the department announced his promotion months later, it was not framed as a reward, but as recognition of integrity. Ethan accepted it without celebration, understanding that responsibility, not rank, was what had changed him. Linda Parker kept her job. More than that, she became a point of contact for new reporting procedures, trusted because she had spoken when it mattered. She no longer kept her eyes down. Her voice, once cautious, grew steady with practice. One morning, long after the headlines had faded, Angela returned to the lobby. The same glass doors, the same flags. But the air felt lighter. At the front desk, a familiar figure sat waiting. Harold Jenkins, the elderly man from that first morning. This time, he was greeted with a smile before he even reached the counter. "Mr. Jenkins," the desk officer said warmly, standing to shake his hand. "We've been expecting you." Harold's eyes widened in surprise. He glanced around, then noticed Angela. Recognition flickered, followed by gratitude. He tipped his cap respectfully. Angela returned the gesture. She stood for a moment, watching the interaction, the ordinary kindness that had once been withheld. It was not dramatic. It was not perfect. But it was progress. Angela reached into her coat and felt the familiar outline of the small camera. She unpinned it carefully, holding it in her palm for a moment longer than necessary. Then she placed it gently into her bag and closed the zipper. The mission was complete. Later that afternoon, Angela stood before a modest gathering outside City Hall. Reporters waited. Residents listened. She did not read from prepared remarks. "I didn't come to Riverside to seek revenge," she said. "I came to protect those who didn't have a voice." Her eyes scanned the crowd. Faces hopeful, wary, attentive. Change doesn't happen because one person demands it. It happens when many people stop looking away. Applause followed. Not thunderous, but sincere. As Angela stepped down, she felt the weight of the city around her. Imperfect, complicated, alive, the work was far from over. She knew that. But Riverside had taken its first real step, and this time it was moving forward.